Today we're going to take a look at brushwork. And brushwork is not the most important part of the painting. In other words, composition, value, use of color temperature, much more important. And usually good brushwork is kind of an outgrowth of understanding those three things. Because I can have really good brushwork, if it's possible, and have a bad composition, bad value, bad color relationships. But good brushwork won't help it at all. It just doesn't do anything. But the opposite is true. I can have really good composition, value, color relationships, and have bad brushwork or boring brushwork. But if the composition, value, and color works, then the painting will still work. So this isn't the most important aspect in painting, but I think it does help to take a look at it separately and kind of go through the idea of what to think about when we're thinking of brushwork. And mostly what I think of, brushwork-wise, is following the direction of the form. Mostly in the light areas, because the thicker the paint gets, the more the brushstroke shows. And I do want my brushstrokes to show. I want my painting to look like paint. The photograph is made up of small little pixels, little dots of color and value. And we don't want our painting to look like that. So brushstroke is important in showing form, showing energy in the painting, showing movement, a lot of different things. So I'll start out my painting when I do the big shapes, those 4 to 8 large masses in the painting. Just fill in 1 or 2 values in each of those masses, like simple dark and light, 2 color, 2 values in the rocks, maybe 2 values, 2 colors in the water. Same thing in the greens. I've got about 3 or 4 hills here. So a dark and light in each of those. Now when I'm doing that, I'm just blocking in. I'm filling in paint. There I'm mostly going to just scrub. The brushwork is not going to affect the finished painting. So I'm just scrubbing in paint, big brush, loading it up and scrubbing it in and filling in those big areas. But when I go back to those big areas, like in the rocks here, what I'm doing is looking for subtle color and value changes within the lights and in the darks. And there my brush strokes are going to make a statement, especially in the lights. Again, the darks are going to be somewhat thinner, so I can, when I go back into the shadow, that scrubbed in color, I usually want my strokes to kind of be vertical in this case, because the rock is more vertical or slanted. But I can generally get a variety of brush strokes in the shadow. So I might do some vertical, few horizontal, few slant, just kind of vary the strokes. Same thing here, maybe as big a brush as possible. It's a good idea to stay away from small brushes to the last 10 minutes of the painting maybe, so you don't get into the bad habit of using a tiny brush to do these big areas. But I can vary the brush strokes in the shadows. I don't want it too much all the same, but it's the light areas where it's really going to matter, because there the paint is thicker and brush strokes show up in thicker paint. So here I'm going to follow the form, kind of half rounded, slanted brush strokes. And I want to vary it. I don't want the same slanted brush stroke, but I do want it to follow the form. Same thing with the lights on top of those cactus. If you live out here and you've painted these, you know how hard it is to get that thin light on those saguaro cactuses. You can see that sometimes on rocks, just a little rim lighting on top of the rock. What I do is I put the lights in a little bigger and then come in with the dark and I cut into the lights. It's much easier to cut in to a light area to get a real thin line than it is to actually make that thin line on the positive side. So using that negative brush stroke there is real important. But same thing with the water. After getting maybe 2 values and colors, just to scrub in and fill in the shape of the water. The thicker, lighter, and sometimes darker strokes, I'm going to use strokes that really follow the form more. And I'm going to make sure they're varied, that they give a really sense of flow to the water, maybe more than what's there even. I'm not a slave to the photograph. I'm trying to create a good painting. So I want strokes that really emphasize that flow of the water. I've got a painting here by Emile Groupet. You can see he blocks things in with probably this simple dark here and then the light here. Then when he comes back into that with some dark and light, you can see the brush strokes. They just really follow the flow of the water, and those are real important to make the water feel like flowing water and to keep it flat. The strokes really keep it flat. You look at the strokes of the trees in the background, they're more vertical, so that makes them stand up more. All these strokes, some might be short, choppy, but they're vertical. They emphasize the height or the vertical shape of the tree. So following that form, real important. And also the thicker, lighter strokes, like in here on the snow, they're real definite, real direct. There's not a lot of blending and scrubbing on them. They're more putting them down once or close to once and just leaving them. The more direct brush strokes, they have more energy to them. The more you go over a brush stroke, when you lick your painting too much, like going over the same spot over and over, you just ruin the painting. Keep your brush strokes pretty simple. My focal point is the rocks here with the little waterfall. So I have to decide from there what's important. And what's important is some of the water as well, and maybe the rocks over here. So that tells me everything else is less important. So I'm going to cut the background off totally and really emphasize the rocks and the water and do more of a horizontal composition. And I think that works pretty good. Got rid of a lot. You can see what I've gotten rid of. Total background there. But that composition works real well. I could also think different shapes. A vertical or square would work well also and show some of the background. So if I want some of the sky and I want to emphasize some distance as well as the rocks and the water, then I'm going to get rid of the stuff on the sides. A lot of stuff on the right and left. So it would be more of a vertical composition. Making sure this rock is off center a little bit, which it is, but still has some of the flow of the water. I like the rock formations, but now I've introduced some of the distance. So I can get two good paintings out of this photograph. And again, use your sketchbook as much as possible. If you have Photoshop or stuff you can do on the computer, use that too, but don't get lazy about it and not use the sketchbook. I still use both, but the drawing really seems to sharpen my compositional eye a lot better than the computer does. Now this next one, so a field here in Greece. Focal point would be more of this red domed building here. And when you have a picture with buildings in it like this, what I try and stay away from is showing the whole shape of all the buildings, because then you're taking in too much and all the buildings are within the picture plane. It makes it feel like there's no space beyond the picture plane. But the minute I crop one of the buildings and I have the whole other building in there, it's covered up by the trees some, but at least it's all in the picture plane, then it gives the sense that there's more space beyond the picture plane. And I don't like this composition though, because when I look at this, my horizon line is somewhere about here. And I want to decide, because the horizon line's in the middle, I have to crop it so the horizon line is lower or higher. So I have to decide, what do I like best, the sky or the foreground? Because it's half and half, and you don't want half and half. You want to decide which is more important, and I think the field in front is obviously more important. So I'll go back and recrop, cut off some of this building, lose a lot of the sky, and emphasize more of the field. The field has, the rock wall here in front, these lines of the whatever's growing there that lead you to the focal point. So those are real important. I would get rid of this. It's just not that important. I'd get rid of that. Not just not important, it kind of distracts from the focal point, which is the building up there. So getting rid of those. And when I get rid of something like that, I just look at the values around it. I'd get more of this and just fill in. and get more of this and just fill in there, and then more of that color and value. So it's kind of like you're looking through it. I'm not necessarily making anything up, but I do want to get rid of it. And then I have these strong lines that lead me to the focal point. But the painting itself just has way too much stuff in it. And of course the horizon line is too dead centered. So it's usually one of the first things I want to think about is my interest more at the bottom half or the top half. You know, if my interest is in a bunch of cloud formations up in the sky, I'm going to crop it so there's more sky and less foreground. So really think about where you're placing that horizon line. And also with these buildings, they're in shadow and they're very vertical. So I want vertical brush strokes in there, a little wider. I want thin, small brush strokes. And even though the shadows are thinner, the strokes don't show as much, it still emphasizes the verticalness of the buildings. You can't get away with some shorter vertical along with the horizontal, and that variation again creates a bit more interest. But again, just following the planes or the form or shapes of things, not getting too involved in the individual, in this case rocks. Mass them together and use some dark accents to suggest that it's many rocks instead of painting each one. Just suggestion will do a lot better than being too literal. This one also, it's more of a vertical composition just because of the tall tree. Secondary interest would be building in here. My horizon line's close to midway, not quite midway, but my emphasis would be more in the sky area because of the height of the tree. The tree's my focal point. So when I crop that or do a thumbnail, I want to get more sky, less foreground, because again my interest is more in the tree and it is more in the top part than in the bottom part. So cutting off a lot of the foreground, trying to get that tree out of center so it's not dead center, and letting it run off in some areas like the side and the top. Gives the whole picture plane more of a sense of space outside of the picture, so that keeps it from looking kind of cramped. Here I'm really going to emphasize, brushwork wise, the roundness. Again, get a big enough brush, not a small one, but a one that's bigger to really show the big masses of, in this case, the yellow-green leaves. The shadows will be a little thinner, so I could, again, do a variety of directions. Short, choppy, horizontal, some longer vertical. But I would vary it because it's going to be a little thinner paint and not show up as much. And that contrast of thicker brush strokes next to the thinner will also create a lot of interest. Nothing flattens things out more than all the paint being the same thickness or the same thinness. So that contrast of thick and thin paint. A lot of flat brush strokes. I might vary them, longer, shorter, and that'll contrast the short, choppy, vertical strokes of the shrubbery. So following the shape or the direction of the form really creates more interest and makes the brush strokes a lot more interesting. So again, we're not copying the photo, so we have to use brushworks to show more movement, excitement, interest in the painting than just trying to copy the photo. And for a while, I mean, copying the photo is actually fairly easy. It might be painstaking and take forever to copy a photo, but there's no thought involved. You just mix until you match. But to think about creating a painting that has excitement in it because of the brushwork is a totally different matter. So think more about direction, brush stroke. Same thing with this one, more vertical because of the tree. So I'm going to crop a little bit here and eliminate some things on the sides. My horizon line is already low, and I'm going to keep it there because I'm not going to change more or less from top to bottom, but I'll change on the sides, cutting off on the sides. And the horizon line is actually right about in here. This is more of a hill, so it's not up there. It's right about in there. So, and I want to emphasize the tree more. And there's water down here, which I like. It was one of the reasons I took the photo. So I would use some thicker paint or brush strokes of kind of mostly darker blue, maybe some lighter, and have that flow in there like that. Have those brush strokes with a thicker dark and light kind of blue violet. I wouldn't worry about the green algae in there or that other slimy looking stuff, maybe a few rocks, but emphasizing the flow of the creek. A variety of slanted brush strokes on this cliff here, almost more vertical here, and then slanted here, with a little bit of value change between the two. So more slanted, maybe slightly darker, slanted and slightly lighter. There has to be a value change because there's form change there. And when you get a form change in there, it has to change the value at least slightly. And I would eliminate a lot of these unnecessary bits of tall grass. It's more distracting than anything. The same thing here, even though my interest is in the hills and the trees, I don't have to have a real tall vertical composition because the mountains aren't very tall. They're more horizontal in nature. They're not real tall peaks. So I do want more foreground, even though my focal point is more in the buildings, but my cropping will be a little bit on the bottom and mostly on the two sides. And it's more a rectangle, but kind of a squarish rectangle than anything too horizontal. This would make a good square composition eventually, but I have the horizon line probably somewhere, not necessarily on that top of that ridge, but right in there. So it's a taller, higher horizon line, more foreground, less sky, but the contrast of the mountain sky and then the darks around the light rooftop will be more the focal point. And here you have a lot of short, choppy brush strokes. Some flat, even though this is short grass, I'd probably emphasize more flat, short, choppy, horizontal strokes against short, choppy, vertical strokes. And that contrast between the different directions will create more interest. Maybe carrying some of the flat back in here, seeing a little bit of it to lead the eye into the middle ground where the house is. I have a few paintings here. This one is by Frank Brangwyn. He was a British painter, early 20th century. And a lot of real strong brushwork, very direct. There wasn't hardly any going over the same area again and again. He made a definite decision, loaded up the brush, put it down. He might have scrubbed everything in slightly thinner first to make sure the values relate well and colors relate well, but very direct. And you can see the short vertical there, kind of going different directions, but a lot of horizontal strokes to emphasize that. And what I like about his brushwork is he can simplify with it quite a bit. Here the figures, they're just a silhouette because they're just a dark against the light. But using negative shape more than anything, probably doesn't draw the legs at all. It just fills this shape in and then comes back and just adds the value of the background wall between the legs there to show that. So everything is just suggested as opposed to being too literal with the brush. So bigger brush strokes that make a big bold statement. And when you try that at first, you're going to be wrong a lot, and that can get frustrating, and then you resort back to what's more comfortable, and that's kind of picking away with a smaller brush. But if you stick with it, the more you do it, the easier it becomes. You can see he's using negative brush strokes. He's using this light wall color to cut in on the figure there and create that movement in the figure. So a lot of negative painting in there. It's another one of his, same type of scene. Again, probably negative painting, probably masked this whole figure in with just one color and value, and then came back and got the background color, negative brush stroke of painting the space between the legs, and then separating the blue color from the dark orange of the pants. But very direct, not a lot of picking away at things. And when you paint this way, you want to mix up a value, make a definite decision, put it down, and if it's wrong, you just scrape it off. You don't want to try and go back into it too much. If it's, wrong value, wrong temperature, just scrape it off. You put it in the wrong place. He's not painting over mistakes. He's scraping them and making them right. So it looks very quick, spontaneous, but you don't know how many wrong brush strokes he did where he had to scrape and do it again. But there's not a lot of going over the same area. He wants that fresher look in there. Now this is a painting by Emile Groupé. It does emphasize direction of brushwork. The slanted strokes following the path here. All of his strokes really emphasize shape and a lot of energy and movement. This is not a peaceful, quiet painting. It's a lot of movement and energy in there, and a lot of brushwork to show form. And you can see it's thick paint. This is Emile Groupé. He painted almost exclusively outside and would do bigger paintings. I think this is a 20 by 24, and he did it outside. He did it in one sitting. I don't know, maybe 3-4 hours, maybe a bit more or less. I'm not sure, but it's in one sitting, so he doesn't mess around. It's all large masses and real expressive brushwork. And this is that creek scene showed earlier of Emile Groupé with a nice flowing brush strokes that really suggest the water, and the vertical strokes to suggest the trees. So another Emile Groupé, very big on brushwork. Again, very direct, mixing up a value and color and putting it down and leaving it alone. Because when you paint outside, and again, this is a larger painting, there's just no time to piddle around with small strokes, kind of going over things again and again. You load it up and put it down, and you get everything filled in. You can go back then and make some changes, but you don't spend too much time in one area. You want to get everything filled in with direct, definite strokes and values. Oh, this is a painting I did in Utah, small one. And again, you can see the brush strokes following the shape of the tree. And I'm varying them a little bit, trying to make the brush strokes more interesting, the shape more interesting in the painting than in the photograph. Don't have the photograph here, but you can see the shadow is more vertical. A little bit of horizontal somewhere. Usually have it in there, but more vertical to emphasize the tall trees. The slanted strokes to suggest the slanted roof, flat strokes to suggest the flat ground. Again, more vertical here, and then flat on the flat top part of the rock. So follow the form, especially in the thicker paint, and be more decisive. Make a definite decision and put it down. That's hard at first because we do make mistakes with that, but after a while, the more you stick with it, the better it gets as far as, again, making a definite decision instead of sneaking up on the value in the brushwork. Mix it up and put it down. You can always block things in, everything real thin first, so you can see how the relationships are going to work, but then get to the thick paint, especially in the lights, and follow the form.